the end of Jesus' ministry, and just before the cross, he was going into Jerusalem for the last time. And they were going to eat the Last Supper and then the trial. And on his way in, he came upon this fig tree. And that's what we're going to look at today. It's about Easter. It's about Easter week. So we're going to look at that. And but first, before we go, what is a parable?
A story that teaches. I hear an echo over there. A story that teaches us a lesson.
Okay, it's a physical situation that teaches us a spiritual lesson. Okay, so you read the parable and it's about people and it's about things, but every time there is a spiritual truth involved. Okay, he's trying to teach you something deeper. All right, there's three kinds of parables. What are they? Three types.
Why don't you tell us?
We know that you know.
Okay, there is the situation actually happened. The ladder broke, somebody fell, and God showed His grace. God showed how He provides. God shows healing. God shows everybody around that He's there. It wasn't. It didn't happen without His knowledge, and it didn't happen without His grace. He took care of everything. So it's a real situation, and out of that real situation, God shows us a spiritual truth, His provision, His healing, His love, His presence. Then there's a parable that's like the king that went into another country and put three guys in charge. They're not real people. It's not an actual situation, but it's a story about a real situation that could have happened, and there's a truth behind it that teaches us a spiritual lesson. And then there's the supernatural parable, like the Lord of the Rings, with the orcs and the goblins and Gandalf, the wizard, and all that. And it's not a real situation. There never were elves, no matter what you were taught in school. And
But it was an awesome situation.
but or the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and those stories, and they had deep spiritual truths connected with them, and they are good stories to read. And they're great literature. But it's not a situation that actually ever happened or would ever happen, because it's more symbolic. This one is a living parable. It's called a living parable. It actually happened. Jesus actually walked down the road. There was an actual fig tree there, and so this is a living parable. So somebody read Matthew 21:18-22.
Now in the morning, as he returned into the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it, and found nothing thereon but leaves only, and said unto it, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How soon is the fig tree withered away? Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. And all things whatsoever ye shall seek in prayer, believing ye shall receive.
Okay. Now, there's a second account of it in Mark. So somebody read Mark 11:12-14. And I want you to look and see how they differ.
And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Jesus answered and said unto it, No man eateth fruit thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it.
Okay, how they differ.
The second one states that it wasn't time for figs yet.
Right, it wasn't the season for figs. It would be like me going out this afternoon to get an apple off my apple tree. And there aren't any apples on my apple tree. And so then I get upset and I curse my apple tree or take a chainsaw and cut it down because it doesn't have apples on it. Okay? Now, does Jesus seem out of character here? Doesn't he seem kind of aggravated and frustrated? And was it right to curse a fig tree for doing what it was created to do? I mean, it wasn't the season for figs. So why was the fig tree cursed? Want me to tell you?
Why don't you tell us?
Okay. There's a point he's trying to make here, and you have to understand what the fig tree represents, and you have to understand how the fig tree works. Fig tree bears fruit twice. First in the early spring, it flowers out, and it puts on a little bitty fig about the size of my thumbnail. And it's not edible. It's really hard and bitter, and then those figs fall off, the leaves come on, and then a few weeks later it blooms again, and then the real figs come on. So there's actually two harvests. There's the first blooming and the first bearing, and they're not edible and they're not usable, and then there's the second blooming and the second bearing, and that one is harvested, and that's what we get. That's what we get the edible figs from. Okay. What does the fig tree there's a couple more questions here. There's one more. Why is it important to combine these two accounts and not just go with one or the other?
Two different views.
There's two different views from two different people. And there's a little bit of difference in them. There's no conflicts. They don't conflict with each other. But if you don't read the whole Bible, you don't get the whole picture. That's how people get false theology. You know, an eye for an eye. And you got it coming.
You've got lots of eyes coming out.
And I'm going to watch Carrie do it. And I'm not stopping her either. But you know, you can take a verse out and you can use it as a club to beat somebody over the head with. And that's not what it's saying. You know, if you go to that eye for an eye passage in Matthew, what comes right after he says eye for an eye? But I say to you. Well, people take the first half of that verse and say, I want to get you, you got it coming. It's an eye for an eye. You did this, I'm going to do it back to you. That's not what Jesus said in that verse, is it? He said, you have heard that it is written, an eye for an eye, but I say to you, love your neighbor as yourself. So if you just take half that verse, or if you just take this verse and pull it out of context and use it for a club, you're misusing the scripture and you are not doing what Jesus told you to do. So you got to read the whole thing. When we read the whole thing, we get the whole picture. It was not yet time for figs. But that wasn't in the first account. So in order to get the complete picture, we have to read the whole thing. That's why I don't skip verses. You know, you've heard people give you half a verse and then preach a sermon on it. When I was preaching in a church, we would start with the first verse in the book, and we would read every verse, talk about every verse, all the way through to the end of the book. I didn't pick and choose what I liked or the best way to preach at somebody. I made myself go through the whole book and account, and that gets sticky. You know, it is hard to, because you're going to come up on a verse about divorce or something like that, and you know that there's somebody in the church that just got divorced, and it's hard to preach about that because you're afraid you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, but you can't skip over it. Because when you start skipping over verses, you don't have the full picture anymore, And that's an easy way to get off the road. What does fig tree represent? What's he talking about here? He's not really talking about a fig tree. He's trying to send a spiritual truth of some kind. What's the fig tree represent?
Us? Us?
No. Nice try.
No.
It could, well, it could be applied to us, but right here, he's talking about Israel and what Israel's up to. And the first season that Israel has a chance to bear fruit, and they don't. They reject him, they hang him on a cross. And then there's going to be the second season for Israel to bear fruit, and we're going to find that in Revelation in a few weeks when the 144,000 go out and start to preach the gospel to the whole world. And there'll be this huge revival like the world has never seen. Because the bottom line is, nobody can do the job better than the person that God chooses to do it. And he chose Israel to take salvation to the world. Israel said, we're not having any part of it. We don't want anything to do with those Gentiles. Okay? And so it passed on to the church, and it would be like you wanting me to sing a solo with your next special. It was not going to work very well. Okay? Now the church made an effort, and the church did the best it could do, but the bottom line is it was Israel's job to take the salvation message to the world, and they said, no, we're not going to do it. So God had to go to plan B. Nobody could do it better than Israel, and when Israel finally picks it up and finally takes the message out to the world, it's going to be a huge revival, and millions upon millions of people are going to be saved. And, you know, each one of us has gifts, and nobody can do your gift better than you. You know, I'm a reasonable cook. I am not a singer. When you guys sing, it just sends chills down my back, and I wish I could do that, but God chose me to teach, and he chose me to cook.
Amen.
And so, on Tuesday night, I'm cooking chicken 3 ways. And I can do that. But I can't sing a special next Sunday morning in front of church. You will all leave screaming and holding your I have actually had 2 choir directors talk me into being in the choir and then ask me to mouth the words after that. Ask my wife. It's the truth. I can't sing. And it doesn't matter how much I want to. That's your job. That's not my job. I'll cook, you sing. Okay? All right.
You're also really good at doing cast iron.
That's cooking.
Yeah.
No, I mean seasoning.
You know, we all have our gifts, and we all have more than one gift. And those are the things we should be doing.
Yeah, plumbing,
And plumbing and electrical and roofing and
gardening, flooring, and painting, and
Back to this.
Yeah, because you've got like 400 and I've got like none.
your muffins.
You talk a lot. You're good at that.
You know, the thing about
white
that is,
bread.
thing about that is you go around the room and you say, what's your gift? And silence. What's your gift? And silence. And what's your gift?
I can paint.
Yeah, you can paint. What's your gift?
Not talking.
But you know, I can go around the room again
I can sleep.
and I can say,
I
Jennifer, what's Jessica's gift?
Singing.
Singing. Instantly, she can tell me instantly what Jessica's gift is. Why doesn't Jessica know?
She don't think she can sing.
Huh?
She doesn't think she can sing.
I'm sorry.
She doesn't think she can sing.
He doesn't think she can sing. Why not? Because we didn't encourage her. We didn't tell her what a blessing
I
it
love
was.
you.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm serious now. I'm being serious. We don't encourage each other, and we don't tell. I can go around and I can point to Dawn, I can point to everybody in the room, and you guys can tell me what her gift is. But she doesn't know what they are. Why not?
She can kick Steve's butt.
And I would, you notice Zach doesn't get on her case.
Yes, I
He just does it from afar.
You know, I spent almost the whole day one time thinking about that. I remember you saying something about that, how we don't realize our own gift, but we know each other's, and that's true.
And the second thing is, we got this false humility about it. We think that we're not allowed to say, I can sing. I can cook.
do. Yes, you
Yes, you can. Yes, I can.
Now,
Remember that? Nutty Professor?
it's God's gift. It's God's gift to me. Okay?
No, it's not gift to us.
Yeah.
And it's God's gift, hopefully to you.
Your gift is my gift, and it shows.
Jessica can sing, and it's God's gift to her, and it's also God's gift to me. Okay? Now, the problem comes is when I start telling you how wonderful a cook I am and leave God out of it. Now, if I say God is really great because He gave us all the gifts we need, and tomorrow night I can cook and we can have a nice meal. But I got to give God the glory and not start lifting myself up. I can name you a dozen gospel singers who got to thinking that the gift was through their work, and their ministries all crashed and burned. Why? Because God had to get their attention. It's always about God. It's never about me. But if I'm not willing to tell you what my gifts are, you can't share them. If I hide them, like that light under a bushel, you can't benefit from them. And I can't benefit from yours. Zach fixed my tractor this week. It's kind of humiliating. I worked on it for a year. He worked on it for 10 minutes. It runs great. But I needed Zach. Now, maybe I could have done the same thing Zach did, or maybe God wanted to fuse Zach and I together to support one another. Because, you know, we don't just come here on Sunday morning, leave each other behind and walk away, because our spirits are always connected. And sometimes we need to be together to help each other. And that's the way it needs to be. Because nobody stands alone but Jesus. Okay, Matthew 24, 32 to 35. Any questions on that? If you don't know what your gift is, ask. We'll tell you. Matthew 24, 32 to 35. Anybody?
Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, yet know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass, till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away.
Okay. We've already answered this one, but I'll read it anyway. What is Israel's purpose to exist on this earth?
Teach the gospel, or spread the gospel.
To preach the gospel, to spread salvation. They did it initially by giving us Jesus, but then they were supposed to take off after Jesus, and they were supposed to spread the good news to the whole world. Their first chance was like the unedible figs. They said, we're not going to share. And so what they had to offer did not change the world. Matter of fact, it put them in the year 70 AD, it put them into exile until the year 1947. They were scattered all over the world. In 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was under siege. All the people were taken and used for slaves all over the world, and they didn't come back home until 1947. They were away from home for almost 1,900 years. That was their punishment. Then they come back home, and it's interesting. If you ever use Google Map or Google Earth,
Yep.
and you find your house, you put in your address, and you can look down from a satellite and see your house. Well, if you use Google Earth and you look down at the Middle East, what do you see?
Brown.
Hmm?
Brown.
Brown. Except for one little long green spot. And what do you suppose that long green spot is?
Jerusalem.
Israel, Jerusalem. Right in the middle of this desert. Their dirt's just like everybody else's dirt. Their sand's just like everybody else's sand. Their weather's just like everybody else's weather. But when the Jews are in Israel, it's green. And for 1,900 years they were not in Israel, and it was just a barren desert. But when the Jews came back home, Israel bloomed. Don't you think there's a lesson in that somewhere? Don't you think the Arabs would say, well, why is their sand, why are they exporting food and we are importing 95% of all the food we eat in Saudi Arabia or in Iraq or Iran? Unless you want to eat goat for the rest of your life, you're going to have to buy it from somebody else because they can't grow anything in those Arab nations. Except for this one green spot right in the middle of all that mess, and it's just as green as it can be. Google Earth it sometime. And you got this big, brown, huge desert with a green spot right in the middle of it. Their rivers aren't any different than the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Yet their land blooms and the Arabs' land doesn't. There's a lesson there. Somebody ought to be looking. Okay, what is Israel's, what does the Bible say about Israel and the fig tree? In Judges 9:11, but the fig tree saith unto them, should I forsake my sweetness and my good fruit and go and be promoted over the trees? That was a prophecy concerning Israel's rejection of the Christ. In that prophecy, Israel said, why should we give up what we've got? Why should we change our religion? Why should we do anything different? We've got it made. So we don't want this new job we've been given. What happened to Israel then? They withered like that fig tree. The fig tree withered in a day. They withered in 30 years after this event. When they said no to God, they began to wither on that day. And 70 years later, they were gone. Not to return again for 1,900 years. Okay? And what happens to me when I reject God? God says, I want you to teach Sunday school and fix breakfast. And I say, I'm not getting up that early.
Then we're in here going.
Hmm?
Then we're all here going.
Yeah.
And we starve.
I'm hungry and stupid.
Or God says to you, I want you to sing. And you say, no, I'm not equal with that. God, if God says I want you to sing, you can sing. And you ought to be doing it. Or if God says sweep the floor, nobody's going to sweep the floor better than you. If you don't do it, somebody else will have to do it. They won't do it as good as you can do it, and you will wither and pass away. You'll end up sitting on a pew wondering why everybody else is happier than you are. You won't be happy because you're not accomplished.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I just did, I know. So, somebody told me this one day, and I wanted to know if it was true or not. So, let's say, like Jessica singing. Sorry, Jessica. So, if God gives you a talent, for instance, singing, and if you decide, I don't want to do that, and you fight God on it, you don't want it, I don't want it. Will he give that to somebody else? And you kind of lose your chance doing it if
He
you
will
fight
use-
hard enough?
He will use somebody else to do it because it needs to be done. But that person will not be able to do it as good as you're able to do it.
So he'll never actually take the gift from you. So like you could always change your mind and start singing, but
You can, yeah, we can always repent.
he won't actually completely take it from you, even though he gives it to somebody else.
Well, he didn't take it from you. He gave you the gift.
And you just
It'll always be there. You just won't have any fulfillment from it. You won't have any sense of accomplishment. And you won't have a ministry. You know, you won't be able to say, man, I was able to cook for them. I was able to teach them. I was able to change lives. I was able to paint the church's basement better than it had ever been painted. You'll have to sit there and look at somebody else's paint job, knowing deep down in your spirit that that should have been your job. And you should have gotten the blessing for it. Okay? All right, Hosea 9:10.
I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first stripe in the fig tree at her first time. But they went to Baal Peor and separated themselves unto that shame, and their abominations were according as they loved.
Okay, here again is another prophecy concerning what would happen to them if their first fruits were like the fig tree's first fruits and weren't usable and weren't. And notice this is written by another complete person 400 years later, and this person didn't know the person that wrote Judges, didn't know Moses. Okay? And they're both prophesying the same thing about Israel. And Israel is related to the fig tree. Related to the fig tree. It said Israel was like a fig tree. Okay, Jeremiah 24:1.
The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah, with the carpenters and smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon.
Okay, 2 baskets of figs. One basket was carried away and was lost. The other basket has not yet come. The other basket is the prophecy of the days to follow and the chapters we'll read in Revelation later on. He said there's 2 baskets of figs, there's 2 harvests. The first harvest they rejected and it was lost. The second harvest will be very fruitful, like the second harvest on the fig tree. Jeremiah 24:5.
Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of cauldrons for their good.
Okay. Here he's saying the second basket is going to be fruitful. The second basket, I'm going to honor that, and they're going to be very, very successful. And when those 144,000 Jews start preaching Jesus Christ, the whole world's going to get converted. I mean, there's going to be salvation like you have never even imagined.
Amen. Me.
Luke 13, 6 through 9.
He spake also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and sought fruit thereon and found none. Then he said unto the dresser of his vineyard, Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down, why cumbereth it to the ground? And he answering said unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it, and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down.
Okay. Who's the fig tree? Israel. Who's the man that came and looked at the fig tree after 3 years and said, I see no fruit, cut it down, throw it away? Who's that man? The other guy.
Holy Spirit.
The other one. God the Father.
There's only three.
I mean, you only had three. God the Father looked down and said, you know, Jesus, this ain't working. These people are too hard-headed and too stiff-necked, and it's not going to work. And Jesus stood. What do you think the 3 years represents?
3 days.
Huh?
The 3 days? No. No.
How long was Jesus' ministry?
3 years.
Huh?
3 years.
3.5 years. Okay. After 3 years, God said, it's not working. God the Father said, it's not working. Jesus said, hold on, I'm not done yet. They haven't seen the empty grave. I haven't preached my last sermon. Let's let it go. And so he said, give me another year. Now, about 6-7 months later, Jesus was crucified. So what happened to the year? Well, after he was crucified, he walked around with the disciples for a couple months. And then there was a few months after this was written, so there's 2 or 3 months before he was crucified. And then he was on earth 40 days after he was crucified, and then he rose, and then he sent back his spirit about 45 days later. And so if you add everything together, it equals just about a year. Then after the grave was empty, after the Holy Spirit come, and they started to persecute the disciples for preaching the gospel, God said, that's enough. And he turned them over to the Romans. And then they were taken and spread out all over the world, and Israel was taken from them for 1900 years. See how this is all fitting together? And if you don't read the whole gospel and all the verses and all the prophecies, you don't get the whole picture, and it's just a fig tree, and Jesus is kind of out of character, and what is going on with that anyway? But when you read all the verses and put them all together and get the whole picture, it becomes beautiful, and it becomes intricate, and it becomes perfect. But we can't just take pieces of it and try and live our lives by it. We have to have the whole thing. Okay, last one is Genesis. Notice what they covered themselves with.
Fig leaves.
With fig leaves. And what does that say about in prophecy for later on? Why did they use fig leaves, do you think? Because Israel was going to provide the salvation. And they tried to cover their sin with the fig leaves, but the covering of Jesus' blood was going to be the thing that did it later on. And we got to watch this.
Let's get this down.
If you got any questions, save them for